Welcome, everyone. We are excited to introduce you to Black to the Beginning, where we are aiming to create an unapologetic and culturally relevant platform to discuss Black adoption.
Yes, we want to make space that centers the voice of Black adoptees, and equally important, the collective conversations with parents, biological families, and experts. Whether you know it or not, we've all been touched by adoption.
So now that you've been properly introduced to Black to the Beginning, let's get into who we are and share our stories.
Let's get into it.
So I am Dr. Sam.
Hey, and I am Sandria. And yeah, we are the women behind Black to the Beginning. I feel like this has been a long time coming.
Absolutely. Far too long. And so, why do this? Why do it now?
Well, I think, like you just mentioned, far too long. The conversation is necessary, it's critical. And if you had asked me that 3 years ago, I would have been like, I don't know. That doesn't involve me. But things have changed. 2 years ago, I found out that I'm adopted, which for me was a complete shock. Would have never guessed, couldn't have paid me to think that I was adopted. But yet here we are. Right. And for me, one of the first things that I did, I immediately went to Google, and I'm just trying to find information about Black people in adoption, African Americans in adoption. Like, I was just looking for something to help me make sense of what I had just learned about myself. And I couldn't really find anything. Like, it was dang near impossible to find any information, relevant information about Black adoption, specifically from the perspective of Black adoptees. Like, we have no voice. Nobody talks about Black adoptees. I'm like, I can't be the only person on the planet that's going through this right now. I know I am not the only Black person that's ever been adopted. But when I looked on the internet, that's what it felt like. I just felt like there weren't stories that I could relate to. There was no type of community, no real information. And so for me, I felt like somebody needs to talk about this. Like, why aren't we talking about it? Not just in the context of Google and things like that, but just in our own relationships, in our families, in our friendships. We just don't talk about it. And for me, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Super problem.
And speaking of friendships, like, we've been friends for a very long time. We always try and go back and figure out, like, how long has it been? Somewhere around
MySpace. That's all I got.
Back in the MySpace days, however long ago that was, but well over a decade at this point. Yes. And so, I found out that I was adopted at 26. So that's quite some time ago, without sharing my age with you guys, but quite some time ago. And I was in no rush to share with anybody. I did not go to the Google. Instead, I kept it pretty much completely to myself. And so I think part of it too is that secrecy element of it, in some ways feeling like low-key ashamed, of the fact that that was a part of my reality. And as you know, I really didn't share like with our core group of friends until 2016, and that was close to a decade, after, I found out about it. And so the thing is that I think it's also important for us to take away, all the secrecy and the shame that is shrouded around adoption. And then when you couple that with being Black and adopted, you already have an identity that is attached to a ton of different historical aspects that bring about, that shame, right? And where you come from. And so it's like you're really trying to balance in between the two. So you're both Black and you adopted, and really just trying to figure out where you fit and what your space is in this world.
And it's crazy because we put so much pride in our ancestry, in our roots. We're so proud of our ancestors, we're proud of our history, but then at the same time, we don't put that same type of emphasis when it comes to adoption. So we'll keep somebody's birth story, their origin story on the hush, it's, this elephant in the room of the family, because certain people may know, but then that child won't know. So it's like we can have so much pride in legacy, ancestry, all of that, but when it comes to adoption, it's almost like don't ask, don't tell, don't talk about it. Like my parents never told me. Both of my parents are deceased, and they literally took it to the grave. And it was only 2 years ago that a cousin told me. So if she hadn't have told me, I wouldn't have found out until much later. But it's that secrecy, it's that stigma. Even when my cousin wanted to tell me, it was this whole idea of how will other people in the family take it with her telling me. So even that became a thing. It's like, you can't talk about it. Don't talk about it. Like, why do we do that?
And, it's funny because my mom is still living, but my father is deceased. And I remember asking, them like, why are you telling me now, right? And for my mom, because my mom was who told me, my father actually did not want me to ever know. So if you think about it, it's one of those things where as a couple, like they had decided, we're not going to tell this child her origin, right? Or what her actual birth story is until a certain point, okay? And so they made that conscious decision. But even then, when that time came, my father wasn't ready to do that, at all. My mother ends up telling me at a Fridays, like any other, weekend afternoon. And it's like, oh yeah, so by the way, you're adopted. Say what? It's like.
Now, before that, did you have any type of inkling, idea? Like, did you know that this conversation could possibly come up?
No. So I never would have guessed that I was adopted, but I would be curious as to what other adoptees think about this. But the moment that I was told, I felt like I knew all along. I think there's something about just how you grow up and how you are feeling out your space, in this world. And when you're looking at the other people that are around you and you're like, you're my family, but you're not my people, so there's something different, here. Why don't I do this or do that? Like, I love and adore my mother, right? But I never saw my face in hers, so I'm just constantly looking and puzzled, but then you look at other family members and they look exactly like you can tell their family. But for some reason, I'm like, I'm your family, but I don't see myself here. So it's one of those things where it's in the back of your head that you don't fit, but you have no reason to believe that you're adopted.
Right. No, and I share that same experience. Like I couldn't have guessed it, couldn't have paid me, but then when it was confirmed, when my aunt told me, I felt a sense of peace. Like it made sense. And I would always tell people, like, me finding out that I'm adopted made me feel like I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
Like all the things that I felt, just things that you could never really pinpoint, couldn't put my finger on. Why do I feel this way? It's like once she said it and she confirmed it, it was like everything just made so much sense. And so it just gave me a sense of peace. Like I'm validated. I'm crazy. Like y'all had me out here thinking I was crazy for 38 years. Like a long time to think that, something arbitrarily is just off with you, something is wrong with you. And then it's like, no, something traumatic happened to you at birth. And then there's another trauma added on top of that, because now I'm finding out that it's been a secret the whole time. So now I have to deal with the feelings of the people that I love, the people that I trusted, the people who were entrusted to take care of me, kept something from me. So it's like trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, and just recognizing like everything that I felt has a reason. So it gave me peace.
And you're using the word trauma, right? And so in thinking about that, you actually feel then that adoption or the beginning of your story is one that is steeped in trauma. How do you think the people are going to feel about using that word, trauma?
And it's one of those things like, and I always say I'm going through this in real time. So it's like I have to think about things now that I didn't have to think about a few years ago. So it's like as I'm learning things, as I'm discovering things about myself, my views on adoption, my views on trauma, they evolve, they shift. But the more that I sit with myself, the more that I think about my past, the more that I read about child-mother separation, the more that I see like, yes, this is a traumatic experience. And for me, I agree with research that shows you don't even have to consciously be aware of being adopted or whatever your trauma was at the time when you were a baby. You don't have to consciously be aware of this. So yes, I went through 38 years of my life without consciously knowing I was adopted, but that trauma doesn't disappear. Like it's still within my body. It's still a part of me, even without me knowing. So I can see how it's played out over my life. I believe that we store our emotions and our trauma in our bodies, which for me was like a huge full circle moment, because I had gotten into doing yoga. I've gotten certified to do yoga. So all these years that I've been, studying the body, studying the mind, body, spirit connection, I never would have guessed that I would be looking at that type of activity, that type of research, and relate it to being adopted. But it all fits together. Like we're holding memories that we consciously don't even know that we have. And it's traumatic. Like when I think about trauma, I don't just think about my own trauma, but I think about my biological parents. I think about my birth mother and what she may have been going through. I'm not a parent, I'm not a mother, but if I were to put myself in her shoes, in the shoes of any woman, I would imagine it's difficult to carry a child for 9 months. And, you definitely can speak to this, but I can imagine it would be difficult to carry this child 9 months, bond with this child, or maybe not bond with the child, depending on if you're, keeping the pregnancy a secret, or you already know that you have to relinquish this child. And then once that mother gives birth, she may not even hold the baby. She may not want to look at the baby. And you're just automatically separated from this life that, you know, the two of you have been connected for 9 months. So right there, that's traumatic in itself. That's traumatic on the baby. That's traumatic on the birth mother. If the father is in the picture, that's traumatic for him as well, because he's also experiencing that. So it's trauma all the way around. But I think what people don't understand is that it doesn't end at adoption. So even though you might be placed with a loving family, a loving home, all that stuff that happened before that child was placed, it still happened. But I think people take on the idea that once the child is adopted, yes, they get a new birth certificate. You might change their name if they already had a name.
Yeah.
But they don't start a whole new life. There was life that happened before that you just can't close your eyes and pretend it never happened by keeping it a secret. And I think that's what people fail to really realize, that whatever happened pre-adoption still happened, and it can still affect you into your adulthood. It's a lifelong journey. It's a lifelong process.
For sure. So I don't know whoever's listening to us. I'm a Capricorn. Okay. So
I'm a Capricorn moon. My Pisces, that's my main sign.
I'm a Capricorn, and for my fellow Caps, you already know how we do, right? We are extremely driven, we are ambitious, we are perfectionists, like all of those things, right? Like we're going to take it full throttle on pretty much anything. It can be your work, it can be folding. You could be folding your socks, okay? And it's like, nope, this needs to be done with excellence, okay? So
Folded in excellence.
needs to be done with excellence. However, I'm gonna tell you something about like this conversation around trauma though. It had me thinking about like, is that perfectionism because I'm a Capricorn, or is that control because of the fact that control was taken away from me right from the womb? Okay, so you get put into this place as a little baby where you are figuring out how to survive. And so people seem to think, oh, well, even if you were like in the hospital and then you went directly to an orphanage, there were people caring for you, you know, you weren't by yourself. And so I'm also a mother, you know, of two myself. And so for anyone who, you know, has actually carried a child in their womb, you know, we know that your child falls asleep to your heartbeat. Your child, even, you know, once they are delivered, like they need to be close to your, you know, skin. They need to like feel that. And that is intentional, to have that contact with the mother, you know. Even now, my children will lay against me in the same way that they used to lay when they are in the womb. So there's even times where I'm laid a certain way and I'm like, did I lay this way, you know, in utero? I don't know, right? But probably, because those things are all biological. And the moment you are taking a child away from what has been natural to them, it's like essentially, I've been hearing this person's heartbeat for 9 months. Okay, I fall asleep to it. I know it. I know their smell. I know their sound. And then all of a sudden, that individual is gone. I want you to sit with that. Okay, that person is gone. And so now you hear these other voices. And guess what? You're probably not fully soothed by them either, because you're like, where is my mama?
Where's the voice that I've been hearing for 9 months? Yeah.
Where's that voice? You know? And so the thing is, you know, I feel like for adoptees, if you've ever gotten to a place where you felt down about being adopted, I would say look at it as a key test in resiliency, because you've been able to move forward despite being snatched from your comfortable, circumstance from the moment you were born, right? And so the thing is that you had to build those resiliency factors in order to survive. And it is extremely traumatic. It does put you into a place, at least for me, further in life, and even recognizing that, I was adopted, it's like, I'm trying to control aspects of my life because other people have been controlling my life since the moment I got here, including my own parents, so they've decided when they're going to tell me that I'm adopted, right? Like, they're making all these decisions for me. And it's very jarring to get into adulthood and feel like everything about yourself is a lie, you know? The existence, that you have been a part of, you struggle with, like, is that really who I am? Or
is that who I needed to be?
Who I needed to be. So the question is still out on that.
Yeah. No, the identity piece is definitely real. And what you said, it made me think of something, thinking about, not hearing your birth mother's voice after you've been born. And for me, it makes me think about when you're in the womb and your mother speaks to you. People speak to their bellies, outside people speak to the baby. So it's like you're getting fed or you're being starved, depending on the situation, when you're in the womb. And so when I think about, even the name Black to the Beginning, and thinking about going back to my beginning, part of what I wanted to know about my birth story, my origin story was, what were the circumstances when I was in the womb? Like, and I know this might sound anal, this might sound crazy, but like, I want to know, what were the conversations that my birth mother was having with me at the time we were together, or were we not having any conversations? Like, was she not speaking to me? Was it one of those things like she didn't want to build a connection because she knew that she wouldn't be able to keep me? Or did she feed me positive messages? Was she still trying to send me well wishes even though she wouldn't keep me? So for me, I feel like those conversations are key, because I do believe, like, babies in the womb, like they're getting those messages. So when people come out and they display certain personality traits, or maybe they struggle with self-esteem, or maybe they have high self-esteem, I really do feel like a lot of that can be traced back to those very, very early months. And I'm curious, like, when I say go back to the beginning, like, that's how far back I want to know. I want to know the conversations that were being had around me when I was in the womb. And that might be a lot to ask. That might be a little extra. I want to know the context of what was going on around me.
Yeah. And I think
extra.
And I think you're bringing up a very critical point that we discussed, like, at the top of our introduction to Black to the Beginning, which is that we really want to bring in additional conversations, right? You would never know what your mother was saying to you unless you spoke directly to that person. You will never know, like, what your parents were thinking about unless you had that opportunity to ask them. You would never know, like, how friends felt, right? when you first told them unless you ask them, which is why Black to the Beginning is so important, because we recognize that it's not just about like our stories, right? It's about the fact that it is a web, that spins out. So even if you think about our situation, it's like I end up telling our group of friends, and at that point, you didn't even know.
Didn't even know, right?
you know, and it ends up just spewing off, right? It impacts, my parents, the fact that I'm going through a search and reunion, process. It impacts, my spouse or what have you, because whatever I might be feeling on any given day, I'm not at my best self. It's just, it trickles off into so many different aspects of our lives. And it's important to have conversations with people that are outside of being the Black adoptee, as well, because I feel like that's how we'll get to the full story of all of it.
Right. And it spins out into the web of just Black families having conversations, period. Having conversations about difficult things that happen in our families. So even if it's not adoption, who's talking about substance abuse in the family? Who's talking about mental illness in the family? Who's talking about sexual traumas in the family? Like, there's so many things that we will just sweep under the rug. People might know a little bit about it. They might hear whisperings or whatever, but it's like there's so many conversations that we don't have, but we need to give ourselves permission to actually have them. Like, if we're really serious about not only healing ourselves, but healing generations of families, like at what point in the family line do things get brought to the light? Like, how many generations do we have to wait? So from my perspective, it's like, it starts with us. I've had so many people, after I've started sharing my story of being adopted, just coming to me and saying like, oh, you're so brave, you're so courageous. And when I sit and think about it, I'm like, man, it shouldn't be a brave thing to tell the truth about myself. It should be a courageous thing to just say, I was adopted. This is something that happened to me. But because it's so rare that we actually talk about painful things or just things that happen in our families, it's unique. It does come off as brave. It does come off as courageous. And now other people want to go and have conversations in their families, which, I mean, for me, it gets no better than that. Like, let's just sit down and have some open dialogue and not be afraid to say what needs to be said. Not be afraid to even say, I'm adopted. Because I couldn't even find, like, I was trying to find the hashtag Black and Adopted on Instagram, Google, Facebook. Couldn't find it. Nobody wants to even put those two things together. We'll say everything else. We'll say Black and married with children, Black and financially free. Like, we will be every other thing but this. like nobody. And I guess for me, it's trying to get to the understanding, why don't we talk about it? Like, why don't we hear Black adoptee voices? Is it just because there really hasn't been a platform for it? Is it because it gets overshadowed by other groups that adopt Black children? And it kind of gets lost in the conversation about transracial adoption. Like, why don't other Black adoptees talk about it in a very public way? And maybe we just haven't been talk, to be public about it. I don't know. That's one of the things that I hope we can find out as we go through this and we hear more stories. But just wondering why we don't hear more from Black adoptees.
I think you raised some very valid questions, all of which we definitely want to make sure that we are addressing as part of Black to the Beginning. We thank you so much for listening to us. This is our first introduction to the world. Yay! So definitely show us some love, show some support, but also definitely feel free to share your story. This is all about storytelling. Storytelling is a part of Black culture. We've been doing this forever. So let's utilize this platform as a way to tell our stories, but really get to a place of, you know, healing, right? Just telling the doggone truth, right? And and it's okay, you know, rip the
Right.
Band-Aid, deal with it, and move on. Okay.
Every story, like we already know, every story may not be pretty, it may not have a happy ending, but every story is valid. Like your experience, your story, it matters. It doesn't have to be tied up with a bow. Like we want the real, and it's okay to be real. It's okay if you're not happy about being adopted. I know I go through my cycles. I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm excited. You know, it's like you go through all the different emotions. And I think we all have to be okay with knowing that however you feel is okay. Like your emotions, your story, that matters. So there's space for it here with Black to the Beginning.
For sure. So we signing off, you guys. Thank you so much. Leave us a comment. Follow us at Black to the Beginning. We'll see you guys soon.